perfect.
Alright, so today we're going to be throwing some coilovers into the wagon. So our friends at a workshop were nice enough to lend us their hoist. You can see we've got the coilovers from Angry Industries here and here, and they came with a couple of tools. I think they're just universal tools, so just some spring seat stuff and some Allen keys kicking around in here. And we've also got this white line sway bar. So this sway bar I bought off of a friend of mine named Kai, and it is an adjustable one. So you can see in the middle there, it's got the adjuster. So as we lower the back of the car, you can see that the sway bar is attached, one at the diff and the other at the body. So as the car gets lower, this is going to swing through an arc like that, and the center of the arc is like up here somewhere, so this is going to push out. It's going to move the diff that way as we lower it. So you put an adjustable Panhard rod in there, and you can shrink the length of the Panhard rod to keep the diff in the center. Alright, so here's what we're working with. So this dual sway bar setup I put in a couple of years ago, so that's a great little setup if anyone ever wants to run it. But these are the original style shock absorbers, so they've got a mount here and then a mount up here. And then these are the original springs with their original spring seat. So the spring seats are pretty far past it. And then obviously this is the Panhard rod here. So there's a nut on this side that will undo to get that out, and then just this nut here. So talking to Matt from Angry Industries, he was saying that the R31 wagons have a specific eyelet size, like width. And I'll be honest, I can't remember exactly what it is, but he said that the ones that he gets made are nice and cheap, but as a consequence they're a little bit wide. So we'll pull out the old shock absorbers and then measure them against the new ones, and then we'll have to trim down one of the ends to allow this to fit in the car. So we'll start off by removing everything out of the car and then measure it up and give it a trim. Alright, so we removed the strut and the Panhard rod off of, the strut just off of this side and the Panhard rod off of this side, and then undid the dual sway bar mounts off of its bolt up here. So now and we could then lower this far enough. Don't lower it too far, you'll tear all the arse out of your bushes. But now we can get at the factory spring and lift it off of its spring seat and get those out, and that will give us access to the top bolt for the strut and should give us easy access for the Panhard rod bolt. Alright, so we've got the shock absorbers out and the spring out of the car, which are essentially standard setup. They're aftermarket, but they're a standard size and performance variant. So you can see the immense difference between the standard shock absorber height and the aftermarket one from Angry Industries. Same with the spring height. Now this spring height is adjustable up to about there, but the height of that is ridiculous. So even if we had this adjusted all the way up, we're still missing out by good, God, it's a lot. So it'll be interesting to see the ride height of the car afterwards. And now that I think of it, I actually forgot to measure the ride height, so that's going to be awesome. Alright, so here's the difference between the two Panhard rods. So obviously this is the adjustable one, so we can change the length of it in the middle, and then that's the factory size one. Okay, so if we look at the different widths of these two, it's plain to see that they're vastly different. So the collars come out of here, and this stepped up shoulder section will need to be ground off in order for these to fit onto the stud on the diff where they mount. So you just need to take a grinder to these, or even put them in a lathe if you're lucky enough to have access to one, to just machine that shoulder off, and they should fit. We've also found that these don't quite fit straight on. Some of them are a bit rusty, so this one doesn't quite go all the way on. So you can see the corrosion build up here, so we're just hitting them with a little bit of sandpaper to tidy them up so that there's no more lip and no more rust. And then once we're done, they should be able to fit straight on top, but this one still needs a little bit more action to get on there. So once we've got the bottoms all sorted out, you can also see that at the top of the shock absorbers, they're also different in the width. So these ones will need to be cut down as well to this factory width here. Okay, so I've now cut down the top eyelet, or the top bush, so it's pretty comparable in size. It's not the greatest cut ever, I just did it with a grinder, but it will do the job. The metal up there will squish in a little bit to take up the slack, and then the bottom one, they're up on the car, but they're also cut to size now, so that will all fit nicely. So with the height adjustable shock here, I've just got it bottomed out as high, like as low as it'll go, sort of thing, and you just need to lock this collar off to stop it from rotating. Alright, so we're going to put the springs in now. So we've got the spring seat here, and it will just sit straight on top of the old spring seat. And you can see there's an adjuster, like a tightening Allen bolt there, so it just goes through to close this up and stop your spring seat from changing height. So you loosen that and then you can wind it. So we're going to wind it all the way up to the highest point, and we'll see how it sits. Alright, so this is going to be our set to get it in. So we've got the old spring seat back in just to isolate the sound a little bit, and we'll lower the car down onto that, and then install the shock absorber and the Panhard rod and see how it all sits. We might change this height later, but for now we'll just put it like that. Alright, so we had to cut the bump stops down a little bit. I don't want to take all of the material out, but we took a decent amount out, maybe 1.5 to 2 inches. So I'm just going to bolt these back in, and hopefully we don't have to pull them out and cut them again. Alright, so we just had to drop this front lower controller. Broke this. Took me years to get a good one of these. Idiot. Anyway, so just disconnected the front lower control arm so we could get a bit of room in here, so this didn't hit everything while we attach it, and then it'll all go back in afterwards. Alright, so with that lower control arm out of the way, we're able to manipulate the diff enough so you can see that once it's installed, there's a tiny bit of clearance around everything, and the adjuster is way up the top there. I know you can't really see it, you just have to take my word for it. And yeah, so now we've got one washer there, 2 spaces in there, and you can see that the gap, like the amount of space I cut off, is just a little bit too much, but that's okay. And now this can screw onto the end, and that's the shock absorbers, and the spring is installed on both sides. So obviously this is the hardest side because we've got Panhard rods and whatnot, but that's now installed, and we'll be able to tighten up this collar using the supplied tools with the kit to stop the height of that shock absorber changing. Alright, so that's the maximum droop height that we've got, which was lower than it had ever been with the previous suspension setup. So the shock absorbers are in, and so are the springs on both sides. So all we need to do now is attach a Panhard rod and tighten up these collars, and then adjust the left and right movement from side to side for the Panhard rod. So if we have a quick look, it might be a little bit out of whack from side to side, which is actually pretty close. So we'll see how we go, but so far looks like it'll sit quite low. Alright, so this is pretty much touching everything at max droop. So to tighten this, I just used a screwdriver and bashed it on that to tighten it. So yeah, very tight clearances on full droop with this side here. So alright, so here we go. Everything's installed now. So we go into here, and you can see we've got the new shock and the new spring and its seat. So we tightened up the locking screws, the grub screws for this on both sides, and we tightened up the shock absorber seat on both sides. And I've also adjusted, this has got about 24 clicks on it, so I just put it at about 12 on both sides. And we've also adjusted the Panhard rod. So you just loosen these two off and turn the middle nut, and it goes in and out, because these are like a left hand and a right hand thread, so they go the opposite direction to each other. So it's pretty much all set up. So we're going to put it on the ground now and hope we can get the car off of the hoist, because this is a big hoist and this car is going to be very low now. Alright, so it's the following week, and I've had the car for a weekend. Upon driving it, I realised that the bump stops are probably only about, I can't even tell if you can see anything, there's maybe an inch between the bump stops and where they run into at full droop. So at ride height they're terrible, and the other problem we've got is this is pretty much touching, but at ride height it doesn't really touch. So we also need to adjust the lower portion of the shock absorber so the car has more droop, because at the moment it's maxed out on droop and we're still riding pretty low. So I want to get that as ride height if I can. So we need to adjust these quite a lot, pull the springs out, adjust the seats of the springs, pull the bump stops out, cut more of the bump stop off, and yeah, and then adjust the Panhard again to get it to square up. So